When most people think of Winston Churchill, they imagine the bulldog-faced wartime prime minister, cigar in hand, rallying Britain with speeches during World War II. But decades before that, Churchill was a very different figure, a young, ambitious, and frankly reckless man who managed to make international headlines by pulling off one of the most daring escapes of the Boer War. Today, we're diving into the story of how a young Winston Churchill went from prisoner of war to national hero, and how that adventure set him on the road to political stardom. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born in 1874 into a world of privilege. His father was Lord Randolph Churchill, a rising conservative politician, and his mother was Jenny Jerome, an American socialite. Despite the aristocratic background, young Winston was a troublesome student, often at the bottom of his class, and with a habit of daydreaming about battles and glory. After struggling through school, he entered Sandhurst, Britain's military academy, and became a cavalry officer. But Churchill wasn't content to just serve quietly. He had an itch for adventure and fame, and he discovered a talent for journalism. By the 1890s, he was already traveling to war zones, writing about battles in Cuba, India, Sudan, and making sure his byline appeared in British newspapers. Churchill wasn't just fighting for the empire, he was fighting for a reputation, determined to carve out a name that would propel him into politics. In 1899, the Second Boer War broke out in South Africa. Britain was fighting against Boer settlers, tough, resourceful fighters descended from Dutch colonists. Churchill, 25 years old at the time, saw an opportunity. He went as a war correspondent for the Morning Post, but with a revolver at his side and an eagerness to get dangerously close to the action. It didn't take long. In November 1899, while accompanying an armoured train near the town of Estcourt, Churchill found himself under ambush. The Boers derailed the train with artillery fire. Amid the chaos, Churchill bravely helped clear the wreckage and save wounded men. But he couldn't save himself. He was captured and taken prisoner. Churchill was locked up in a prisoner of war camp in Pretoria, the Boer capital. Conditions weren't horrific compared to other wartime prisons. Officers were treated decently, but for Churchill, captivity was unbearable. He wasn't the type to sit quietly behind a fence. Almost immediately, he began plotting his escape. On the night of December 12, 1899, Churchill saw his chance. He slipped out of the prison by scaling a wall, leaving behind two fellow prisoners who lost their nerve at the last moment. Alone, without a weapon, and with only a few bars of chocolate in his pocket, Churchill vanished into the South African night. The odds were grim. He had nearly 300 miles of enemy territory to cross. Boer patrols were everywhere, and he had no clear plan except to head east and find the British lines. For days, he crept along railways, dodging Boer sentries, hiding in ditches during the day, and moving at night. Hunger gnawed at him, and the fear of capture was constant. At one point, exhausted and desperate, Churchill knocked on the door of a house. It was a gamble, and it nearly cost him everything. But fortune favored him. The house belonged to John Howard, a British expatriate working in the area who happened to be a supporter of the Empire. Howard hid Churchill in a coal mine for several days, while Boer patrols scoured the countryside. When the coast was clear, Howard smuggled Churchill onto a train carrying bales of wool. Hidden from sight, he traveled hundreds of miles east until he finally reached the safety of Portuguese East Africa, in what is now Mozambique. Churchill's escape made sensational headlines back home. Newspapers painted him as a hero who had slipped through enemy hands by sheer courage and determination. In truth, luck and the kindness of strangers played a huge part, but Churchill wasn't about to downplay his own daring. He quickly returned to South Africa, not as a prisoner, but as a correspondent and even as a soldier, taking part in the relief of Ladysmith. His name was now known across Britain. The timing couldn't have been better. In 1900, just a year after his escape, Churchill returned to Britain and stood for Parliament. Riding a wave of fame, he was elected as the Conservative Member of Parliament for Oldham. It's safe to say that without his dramatic escape, his entry into politics might have been slower and far less celebrated. The Boer War had turned him into a national figure. Decades later, Churchill would become Britain's wartime leader, remembered for his bulldog spirit. But it was in South Africa, escaping across the veld with nothing but chocolate in his pocket, that he first captured the imagination of the public. The story of his escape wasn't just a great adventure. It was the launchpad for one of the most remarkable political careers in history.